Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming, and welcome to the Venture Jobs Foundation Prosperity Conference 2023. It's been a long time since we've been in person, so happy to see everybody's faces. We're going to put a link up here. Maybe. Because we're doing a live cast of this. So if you want to send it to a friend or someone that wasn't able to make it, you can send them this link. Also, we are going to have these archived, so if you want to go back and see a session or if you have to run out and miss part of one, we'll have most of them recorded. So look forward to that. There's your QR code if you want to send it. And as we're starting, I want to really welcome everyone back. We tried to do a podcast back in, I got to turn off my live cast here. I'm hearing my voice. So we tried to do it virtually, and the content was good, and we were happy with it, but it didn't have the same feel, and the reason is we didn't have people present. That I think that conventions or networking meetings, or in our case a conference, it's really important to have that personal interaction, and that probably is more valuable than the content that we're presenting, is interacting and meeting with people. And today we're focusing on entrepreneurial ecosystems, and that's something that I got excited as a teenage kid looking up and finding Dr. Dell is an expert, maybe writing the book on ecosystems among entrepreneurs as a form of economic or community development. And so we're really pleased to have him here, and you'll hear him in a few minutes. But the focus of that is that instead of a support organization trying to find the entrepreneurs that they can best help, or an entrepreneur trying to find their way through the maze of all the programs and support activities that are available, is that now we are coming together, and over the last 3 years have come a long ways in Rochester on coordinating our activities and coordinating events. And so I'm happy to see many of our cohorts, participants in that are here today. And you'll see many of them on the panels that come through. So we're excited about that, but an ecosystem is derived from eco, which is life, and system. So that actually tells you everything about what we're trying to develop. There has to be life to this, there has to be activity and energy, and there has to be collaboration, and there has to be organization. The system is organization. We can't just do this haphazardly. So the idea here is, can we get groups together once a year and then more regularly and try to find ways that we can work together, collaborate, and accomplish great things together and serve Rochester. And so that is the goal today. It involves lots of words around that, like inclusiveness. It can't be just an ecosystem of a few. It includes intentionality, that we're working for outcomes that are beneficial to the community, and it has to be collaborative. We can't just do it one-on-one. So I would encourage and challenge all of you today to meet as many people as you can. And we're going to announce later today a way that will help you to stay in touch with everyone, but we really would like you to interact with somebody that doesn't travel in your circles, and you'll be amazed at the coincidences and the connections that are there. So be a part of that ecosystem and meet the people that are here. And for those that are watching live, that we encourage you to reach out to the organizations, and we can all plug you into the ecosystem. I'm also humbled by we decided to try to do this live again, and it's a big job. You can ask Alexis Russell over here, who did 90% of it. But it takes a village, and I was so amazed that we had Sherry, who contacted us saying, how can I help? And we had Asanta, who calls us, hey, can I help you on social media? And we had Barb saying, how can I help? And Augustine has become like a one-man marketing shop, so we appreciate the help there too. And people reaching out to us, and we reached out to a few people for help too, but it's great to see how we rallied to get to this point. So I'm happy to introduce who's going to be introducing Dr. Dell Gines. It's somebody that most of us have seen before. It's Lomax Campbell. Unfortunately, he double booked and is not in town, but we do have members of Third Eye Network, and Dell actually, like I said, I was an excited kid to find Dell because he was doing what we were thinking, and so I was talking with Lomax about it. He goes, oh, I know Dell. So with that, we decided that Lomax would be the best person to introduce him. So with that.
I am excited for the opportunity to introduce this brother, this dynamic brother, Dr. Dell Gines. I'll tell you, I first met Dr. Dell Gines at the Kauffman Foundation eShip Summit back in 2019. He was one of their keynote speakers that year, and that was my first year going to eShip and learning about entrepreneurial ecosystem building. Let me tell you, he was polished, he was well-informed, he was passionate, and at the time, I want to say he was working on his doctoral studies over at University of Nebraska, where he did his dissertation work on entrepreneurial ecosystem building. I followed Dell's work through the years, and we've become colleagues and friends in that time period. He's written numerous publications on entrepreneurial ecosystem building in communities of color, with Black women, in rural, distressed, and urban communities. But he's also recently worked on a playbook on equitable economic development through his relationship with the International Economic Development Council before ultimately going over there as one of their vice presidents. During that initial time that we met, I want to say he hosted a group of Black economic development professionals at the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City for a dinner and discussion around economic empowerment, Black economic empowerment, and things of that nature. And it was just really, really a breath of fresh air to see brothers putting it down for the culture. So Rochester, you are in for a treat. This brother literally wrote the book on the emergence of entrepreneurial ecosystems as a part of the follow-on work to his doctoral studies. And so, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, Rock City, I present to you Dr. Dell Gines.
All right, good morning. This is my clicker, right? Rock City, that's the first time I heard that. First thing I thought was crack rock. I was just joking with you. So, I'm gonna get this out of the way because it was already been asked this morning when people say, well, Dell, where are you from? And I say, Omaha, Nebraska. What do you think is the first question I get? Exactly. So shame on you for having that stereotype. Yes, indeed, there are Black people in Omaha. We make up 13% of the population. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that in my neighborhood. Well, it used to be my neighborhood up to 3 months ago when we moved, that I was born and raised in and lived in for most of my life, called North Omaha, the predominant Black area of the cities. But I'm really excited to be here. And the irony is, back when I worked for the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, where I met Lomax, I would go up to Kansas City. It was kind of like my second home up there. And that's actually where Lomax is now. So it's almost like we switched back and forth and just missed each other, which was unfortunate because I was really looking forward to catching up with him. And we're going to talk about some things which I think are vitally important. But I want to kind of start with a quote that a new friend of mine who was the first arrival, Chris Peoples, back there, national community organizer. I used to work with Al Sharpton. But she said something in our conversation, because we hung out for about 15 minutes. What was it, Chris? She said, "A people united will never lose. A people united will never be defeated." And I thought that was such an excellent quote to talk about the concept of ecosystem building. And so we're going to talk about some things today, but fundamentally, every activity is grounded in humanity, and it's grounded in relationships. There's a term called reification. Reification means that you give human traits to inanimate or institutional objects, but every institution is made up of what? People. So literally everything that has been created that is not part of just the natural biosphere has been part of us creating it. And everything that we create is part of relationships, is part of decision-making, is part of how we organize ourselves. Because what most people don't realize is that when people say economics, the natural inclination is to go to, we talked about the Federal Reserve, Federal Open Market Committee this morning and the rising of interest rates and all of that, and we say, okay, yeah, that's economics. But if you ever looked at the definition of economics, what it says is this: economics is a social science. What does social mean? The interaction of people. And one of the definitions of economics is the decisions people make when faced with scarcity. And this is actually not even part of my presentation, so this is a free one for you. So have you ever watched the show Naked and Afraid? Right? What happens on Naked and Afraid? They put two naked people in the middle of nowhere, and they have to survive. I can't remember how many days they have to survive. And what is it that they first start doing? They start organizing labor. So for us to be able to survive in nakedness, we have to do this. You have to do this. You have to do this. We're going to split organizing. That's the most fundamental understanding of economics. And so when you start thinking about equity and inclusion, the foundation of it from the beginning of human history then is what? Economics. It's not about how people perceive another race. It's about how people created the concept of race, which came out of the same era as mercantilism and early stage capitalism, to justify the dehumanization and the exploitation of black and brown bodies across the globe, because it was an economic development strategy. But it was what? About economics. When we talk about the chattel slavery in the United States, which former Reverend Billy Graham said was the greatest sin in America, you think it was because they didn't like these black people in Africa? No. It was because of what? Economics. And the entire system and technological growth that allowed them to take people across the transatlantic, put them in. I was just in Henry County, Alabama, doing a technical assistance visit. First time I've ever been in cotton fields. And honestly, it was a very slightly emotional experience for me, because I'm looking at these cotton bolls and I'm thinking, this is one of the primary reasons my ancestors were brought over to this nation, these little things, to be able to go out there and pick it and to make it commerce. So when we talk about the black experience in the United States, we have to first understand that we were part of an economic system that, because of that economic system, it dehumanized us, exploited us. And then this concept of race emerged out of it to exploit black labor, brown labor, and through colonialism, their lands. That was a whole economic development strategy. And so we're still dealing with the legacy of that. And so we have to understand that, because all of these things we talk about from a social justice lens, a civil rights lens, mean nothing if we can't get the economic foundation under control and make that more equitable and provide more power to the people that have been left out in the United States. I wanted to level set that. Well, thank you. So let me tell you a little bit about IEDC before we really get into the topic. So I came from the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, where for 12 years I got to do some really cool stuff around ecosystem building. One of my favorite works, and we were talking about a couple of people this morning, was a pretty highly regarded report on black women startups. Most people don't realize black women, probably, I don't know what the new data is, but for sure, through the early 2000s on, were the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in the nation. So, but the problem that I had was nobody was asking why. And so, we did a research that was published in PBS, Inc., CNBC, all of that, to kind of lift up, black women in the landscape. Because if it was any other group, I feel, you would have policy changes, policy conversation, all of that. But black women were not heard. And so we were able to amplify that. And through that, I learned a lot about the black woman experience as an entrepreneur, which was really reinforcing some of the things I've been talking about ecosystems. Which we're going to talk about today. But then I transitioned over to the International Economic Development Council. And one of the large reasons why was because of our capacity to be able to make change on a global scale. But while we're predominantly a United States-based organization, we are the largest global economic development membership association. And so when the new president, who is leading a complete turnaround, said, Dell, would you ever consider working with me? I said, heck yeah, but sign me up. Because I knew that the work that we were doing at the Fed needed to be amplified and it needed to be grounded in the institution that was predominantly responsible for going around to the world, particularly the nation, but also the world, and saying, hey, this is what economic development should be. This is what it was, but this is what it should be. It was inequitable. It was biased towards major corporations. It didn't really care about the extractive nature of what it was doing to the communities in which it came in. And the whole entire, financial system of the United States was geared towards that. And look at where it's gotten us. The emergent, and this is not even race specific. If you look at the wealth gap between the haves and have-nots in the United States, it's only increasing. And this is predominantly because of the historical legacy of economic development that came out of the 1930s and said, you know what, we're going to provide incentives for companies to come into our communities, and we're going to, in many instances, leverage the tax base of the future to support these companies coming. And what was happening, especially in a lot of black and brown communities, which are also racked by things like, you may have heard, redlining, where banks weren't lending in those communities, urban renewal, where we were bisecting their communities with highways, disinvestment, urban sprawl. It was almost like they said, yeah, we're going to give you civil rights, but then we're going to hit you with everything economic that we can to keep you in the position in which you're in. And so now at IEDC, one of the things that I'm most proud of through the new leadership, myself included, in the new strategic plan, is we're talking now something that was never in the lexicon of economic development in the past, which is inclusive prosperity for communities across the world. And most importantly, our guiding principles are on the bottom: engagement, equity, and excellence. And that equity is in the center for a very important reason, that no longer can we justify, or should we justify, giving Amazon $1 billion to come into a community to create 50,000 jobs, when those jobs aren't even touching the poverty rate of the communities that need them the most. Because if this strategy worked well, since it started in the 35s, and I'm not saying that it doesn't have utility, I'm not anti-industrial attraction and retention, but what I'm saying is the portfolio is so imbalanced now that we will give $1 billion to Amazon only for them not to move the needle one time. And the reason that I lifted up me being from Omaha, Nebraska, was because anybody know who is from the rich person that's from Omaha, Nebraska? Warren Buffett. Historically, he used to be one of the most wealthiest people. He still is, but he used to be the #1 wealthiest person in the world. So there was a point in time where we had more Fortune 500 companies than anybody else in the world. Anecdotally, we had more millionaires, even though this is kind of debunked, but we had a lot. More millionaires than anyone else in the world. We went through economic recessions with relatively smooth sailing. Like people that used to be on our branch board at the Fed used to say, man, if we didn't read the papers, we wouldn't even know there was a recession, right? Like we would hear all of these things. And then my area of the community, our black community, North Omaha, we did a Pew report in 2008 that showed we had the #1 highest black poverty rate for children in the nation and the 3rd highest poverty rate for adults. And we have one of the greatest wealth gaps between black and white communities next to Minneapolis, Minnesota. So how do you reconcile those two things? By all accounts, if you look at the economic development environment of Nebraska, it was extremely solid. We had the corporations, we had the millionaires, we had the philanthropy, we had the stability, and yet pervasively, we were the worst in the nation in some critical indicators related to black people. And this tale of two cities has played itself out time and time and time again across the United States communities. Not just urban communities either, not just racially specific demographic groups, but also in our rural communities. And so it's time for us to look at the world differently. And I'm excited to be able to lead an organization that has the ability to impact, or co-lead an organization that has the ability to impact that across the globe. And this is just some of the things that, we do. We certify people. We do a lot of programs, activities. And in fact, and I'm going to butcher the name again, Janicio. I've said that 100 times and got it wrong every time. I actually have a staff member that I went and visited last night who lives up there. And unfortunately, I was not killed by a deer because I heard that was a thing. And she's running a new EDA-funded $30 million grant program to put 65 fellows into 65 communities that are economically disadvantaged. And these are not like Peace Corps folks. These are mid-career professionals that we will inject into communities across the world to create equitable development and help them do that. And it's unprecedented in the United States. She's right up the street from us right here. Because what we've been recognizing is that you cannot change by doing things the same way that you have. But there's a lot of people that benefit in the system from the way that things were. And so you have to come at it a completely different way, and it's not always incremental change. It's not just take one step forward. Sometimes it's radical reimagination of the way things are going to come to a better outcome. And sometimes, like I was talking to the young lady out at the desk this morning, sometimes it's just a reorientation and creating a philosophy of change that will guide your due north and help organize the culture beneath you. So, anybody remember this movie? Gran Torino by Clint Eastwood? So look, I got a story to tell you before we get into some of the meat of the presentation. So again, I told you that I lived in North Omaha, which is our black community in Omaha, and I live on a corner lot. And what is the problem with a corner lot? People be walking all the time through your yard, especially in the hood, right? How many of you live in the hood? All right, so how many are not claiming it? So me, my whole life has been in our quote-unquote hood. That's where I came up in, that's where I lived. And I lived on a corner lot on a busy street. And I remember when I first told this story, I was reflecting back on when I was a kid. So I'm one of 5, and we lived in the same community. And this would have had to been, I think, it had to be back in the 80s, because I was born in 73. So yeah, about that 7 to 10-year-old range. And we had a neighbor named Mr. LaViolet. And some of you had a neighbor named, or was like at least, Mr. LaViolet. And when I tell it, raise your hand if you had somebody like this. Mr. LaViolet, again, we have 5 kids between the ages of like 12 and 3. Mr. LaViolet kept his grass so meticulous. It was almost like a barber came. I got one already. Almost like a barber came with clippers and lined up the edges of his lawn. And we were kids, right? We wanted to live our best life. We were excited. We were vibrant and dynamic. And I swear, this is back before like you ever seen those bank movies where they have the thieves that are trying to get through the lasers, right? And they have to do all these flips and splits to kind of get to the art. Well, I swear, every time we were about to even touch his lawn with our toe, what do you think he did? He came out and yelled at us. And me as a young kid, I'm like, I'm just trying to flourish. I'm just trying to live my best life, Mr. LaViolet. Why are you so damn old and cranky? Found out I'm that same guy. And what makes it so bad is, in retrospect, he was probably younger than I am now. So again, I live on a corner lot. I have become Mr. LaViolet. I'm a cranky guy, and my wife was always like, well, don't yell at them because they're going to like egg us or something like that. And I remember one time this slightly rotund guy was walking without a shirt on, and I'm standing out on my porch, and he starts cutting through my lawn. And I'm looking at him, and he's looking back at me, and I'm looking at him. And finally I say, dude, go around. Because that's what they would do. And so I would get triggered. Anybody get triggered by anything that you probably shouldn't buy? Raise your hand if you do, because I know you all do. That was me. I get triggered by people on the lawn. So, I'm going to give you one more anecdote before I tell the story. Anybody watch the movie, The Avengers, the very first one, Marvel movie? Do you remember at the end of the movies, right? So they're fighting all the aliens. All the Avengers are fighting the aliens, and then the big ship is coming near the end of the movie. And Bruce Banner, who's the Hulk, starts walking up to the ship, and they're like, well, Bruce, don't you have to get angry to turn into a Hulk to fight this big, alien ship? And he said, I got a secret for you, man. I'm always angry. And I realized that was me, especially when people walk across the lawn. So I had a little office in the front of the house. This is like a little room, basically, right in the front. And so one day, I'm doing work on my computer, and I hear these little kids yelling. And all of a sudden, that Hulk energy starts rising in me. I'm getting triggered, because I already told you, unnecessarily triggered by people walking through the lawn. And I'm about to go out and go off. And what do I find out there? And so what do you think my first reaction was? Can I yell at little girls? And then I decided, yes, I can. I believe in equity and inclusion. So immediately I chill, right? I'm like, nah, I can't yell at the kids. I'll be the bad neighbor. I don't want to be Mr. LaViolet. So I go out there and I start talking to them and say, hey, girls, what are you doing? Oh, mister, we're out here selling lemonade, and the tall one's the ringleader, right? You see the table in the back, and I know those of you who are old school and played spades know that, like, the fold-out tables with one of the legs that leads at a slant, right? That's what they got. They got everything lined up. And so I was like, oh, that's great. I said, have you been out here for long? Oh, yeah, we've been out here for a long time. I said, you making any money? Oh, yeah, we're making a lot of money. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And I said, okay, well, because I like to support black businesses, I want to buy a cup. How much does it cost? Oh, mister, you can buy a cup. Look at your coffee cup size. You can buy a cup for $1, but I sell it a half a cup for 50 cents. And so I was like, okay, I started thinking, and then I started looking at the table, and if you look back there, what is that? What is it? Somebody said it. Kool-Aid. It's not lemonade. So first I was thinking about suing for false advertisement. Second, I start running the numbers in my head. How much does it cost for a pack of Kool-Aid? It's only like 10 cents, not even $1. So then I start running the ROI in my head, because one of my master's degrees is in finance, and I'm like, wow, that's a great return on investment. And then my final thought was, because I'm broke and got a lot of student loans, I was like, okay, I got 50 cents, let me get a half a cup. So I leave. I say, keep doing what you're doing a great job, right? So then the second time, I hear it again, but this time I know what's going on, so I'm not triggered. I walk out, and they got a bunch of books on their little table. And I was like, oh, wow, these books, you got a lot of books. And I'm an old sci-fi nerd. I'm like, so what are you doing? Oh, we're out here selling books. I said, you been out here long? Oh, yeah, we're making a lot of money. And I said, that's great. I said, how much are you selling for? Oh, it's $1 for a hardcover, and it's 50 cents for a paperback. And I said, oh, there's a cool Kurt Vonnegut sci-fi novel. Let me get that. So I bought it, and so I buy it, and I'm like, okay, girls, keep doing what you're doing. I'm walking back up to the house, and I say, oh, by the way, where'd you get those books? Oh, mister, they were giving them all away for free at the library, so we went and grabbed as many as we can, and we came up and started selling them. At this point, I'm thinking, man, I need to be charging them rent, because you know the issue, we're on a corner, location, and she's clearly making some money. So the next time, she was trying to sell me an Easy Bake Oven, and I didn't go for it. And then last time I saw the young girls, there's if you see that sign on the back, she was pounding up a sign, yard sale sign. And so I'm pulling up over and about to pull in my and I say, hey, what you got going on? She said, oh, mister, we're doing a yard sale at our house down the street. You need to come, because I know there's some things that your kids are going to want. And so I first told that story at the anti-poverty conference in Topeka, Kansas. And somebody raised their hand and they said, Dell, what do you think is going to happen to those little girls? Now, obviously, because of the stereotypes that we put on young black women, we could have gone a lot of ways with that conversation. Oh, man, just hope they don't become a single mom. Man, I hope they are graduating, blah, blah, blah. All the stuff that we heap upon unnecessarily our children, especially black children. But that's not where my mind went at all. My first reaction was, especially coming from the field that I came through, was this. I said, I don't know, but I'm not optimistic. I said, the reason that I say that is because we've had her in particular and her sisters and cousins have demonstrated tremendous entrepreneurial energy. And they're going into a school system that's going to do its level best to beat it out of them. They're going to tell them, you need to go to college to get a good job. And then what we hope, for those of us who've worked with entrepreneurs in the past, that they come to us at a point in time and maybe she'll remember how awesome she was at this and say, I want to be that again. And then what do we have to do? To use a Star Wars metaphor now, when Luke Skywalker was training with Yoda in the Dagobah system in the swamp, and Luke said, I'm ready to go help fight Darth Vader. Yoda was like, you're not ready. Luke said, I am ready. I've learned so much. Yoda said, that's the problem. You have to unlearn. So now we start our entrepreneurs off by untraining them for everything that they were trained in K through 12, just to get them ready for something that's completely unique to the labor market. That's why I wasn't optimistic for her, which gets us into the concepts of ecosystems. There's a rationale for this, right? So this is Rochester's, the latest demographics I could pull. So roughly, depending on if you classify white alone, white, Hispanic, the number goes down. But 38% of your population is black, right? So, roughly, 4 out of every 10 people. And that number jumps a little bit if you decouple Hispanic from white. So a large percentage of your population is African American here. This is not uncommon. Like we were talking, man, everybody thinks their black community is different, it's worse or whatever. But I've been around to a whole lot of black communities, and I can tell you with an absolute fact, with the exception of maybe some suburbs or some enclaves, every major community with a large black metropolitan area is suffering from the same challenges. But they're also presented with the same opportunities, which we're going to talk about. And so when you look at that number and you juxtapose that by this is what you see. So when you look at the unemployment rate, 16 years old, the groups that are unemployed, only 51.6% of black males and 53.2% of black women are in the labor market, compared to 70% for both white men and females. 50% difference, or not 50%, but about 20% difference. So then when you look at the median household income by race, you're seeing a reflection of that component. $25,000 for the black household, $39,000 for the all-white household, $12,000 difference. When you look at the populations by location that are in there, and you start to see your predominantly minority black populations in the green over there are tracked to every red line that was in that chart, because you could keep going up and you see the green, as are areas in the city that have a lower median household income than average. So now you have this issue of employment, income, location, density. And so you have a place challenge and a people challenge, right? That's what you're dealing with. That's what you're working to solve. That's the opportunity in front of you. And so when you look at the intersection between race and place, and you look at what I told you about the story of the little girls, which is replicated across the entire nation in communities like ours, boys and girls, and not just our community, in other communities as well. The white community is not doing a good job with entrepreneurship. If you look at it, so here's an example of that. So every year back when I was with the Federal Reserve, our bank organized something called the Jackson Hole Symposium, where they brought central bankers over from across the world to talk about the most critical economic issues. What do you think was one of the highest priority issues they talked about? Small business dynamism, which is the rate in which new businesses are formed versus the rate that they die. Brookings back in 2012 showed that in the United States, more businesses were dying than were being created. It has since leveled back out. The pandemic drove a lot of entrepreneurial growth, but we'll see it's sustainable. But the reality is it's an American problem, but if it's an American problem, I want you to think about this, and if it's a global challenge, and if black people have historically been faced with the greatest economic obstacles to growth that could be imposed upon any group in the United States, then how in the world can the solution not be what the central bankers are saying is a global solution? How can that not be a solution to the black communities and the brown communities? And so somewhere between the messaging of this are a whole lot of things. Because if the central bankers, the people from across the world that are responsible for governing economies, are saying small business dynamism is a critical tool and a critical important factor to global economic growth, and black people have suffered the worst economic oppression in the United States, how can small business not be the solution to that challenge? There's just a logic to it. And somehow all of this messaging and conversations and communications and history gets between the fundamental thing is that if economics is about a social science of organizing resources, which fundamentally is about power, then how can you empower any group in the United States who controls virtually nothing? McKinsey came out and said by 2050, black people were projected to have a zero net worth. Latinos by 2060. By 2050, then, what does that make the black community across the United States? A nation of renters. And I suggest that that's a phenomenon that we're seeing not just in Rochester, but across the black communities in the United States. And that's what we're here to talk about. Creates an uh-oh scenario. So if you want to do development in Rochester, how can you do it without actively engaging your diverse communities? How can you do it without driving growth through the populations who have, for a wide variety of reasons, have been economically distressed, imposed upon, and oppressed to a more or lesser degree? And sometimes this isn't even black people. Sometimes this is poor whites who have been in intractable situations as well, our Latinos and our other community members. So how can you drive growth in a community if 40 plus to 50% of your population are not participating either fully in the labor market or fully in the entrepreneurial and venturing process? I argue you cannot. And so until you solve that problem, and until communities around the nation solve that problem, the long-run economic growth both in Rochester and in the United States, unless there's a massive intervention by another Kodak-sized corporation, which is not likely to happen, is going to struggle. Which brings us to the entrepreneurship ecosystem. I've been going around telling everybody that entrepreneurship is not the only way to do economic development, but it absolutely is the tip of the spear. I wish I had time because I go into the impact of artificial intelligence and both the opportunities and challenges it faces for racial equity. But long story short, your productive capacity of entrepreneurship to drive growth, because which companies drive the majority of net new jobs? It's not the corporate sector. Really, stage 2 growth companies between 10 to 99, 1 to 3 years are driving the majority of net new jobs in the United States, over 60% of those. What is classified as a small business is generating half of the jobs in the and maintaining half the jobs in the United States. But our entire economic development system, by and large, is organized for who? Major companies. So we have a structural problem. We have in our communities of color a historical legacy of racism, which is a historical legacy because the things that happened during Jim Crow, that happened during redlining, that happened during urban renewal, that happened during urban sprawl, that happened during historical disinvestment and current disinvestment are still present today, don't get me wrong. The legacy is forward. But the transformational point, not the only point, but the tip of the spear, the most transformative impact that you can do to create change is creating an entrepreneurial environment in which people of all races and ethnicities can fully thrive if that is what they choose to do. And that is why we talk about the equitable ecosystem. And to me, while I can get to more nuances, the more that I go out and I present and I share, and I've talked in over 26 states and 60 cities on an iteration of this topic, to me, I simplified the definition, and we can get more nuance and more conversations, but it's a more even distribution of economic growth, driven by more inclusive policymaking and economic development practices, leading to, which is the most important thing, a greater quality of life for a broader number of people. So when we talk about this thing called the wealth gap, which is exacerbated between the haves and people of color, but it exists in the United States if you really look at it, what we have as a problem is not a growth problem. We don't have an economic growth problem in the United States. We have a distribution of growth problem in the United States. Anytime you hear something where it said the wealth gap is growing, which I'm sure most of you in this space and in this room have heard, the wealth gap is growing, or the wealth gap between the black population and the non-black population is growing, or it's huge. I think last time I checked it was like 22 times the average white wealth versus the average white wealth. What you're hearing if you go behind the veil is not an economic growth problem, it's an economic distribution problem. We have more wealth in the United States than we could ever possibly imagine or need. The problem is the distribution of that wealth. And so what is the best way, if we heard about small business dynamism, when we're talking about Kodak, what happened to Kodak? A new disruptive technology came, that digital, cameras, that made it very difficult for them to compete in that current environment. And the distribution of wealth transitioned from a traditional industry, which we've seen time and time again, is how economies work. Schumpeter called it creative destruction, into a new form of industry. Now, the problem is that these industries ebb and flow, horse and buggy to car. You could just go down the list. Black people and brown people are often not the ones that are at the front end of capturing the wealth, which is where the majority of wealth comes from. Black and brown people predominantly, for a variety of reasons, are not able to take advantage of new technologies. Where are we at in AI? The next disruptive technology. We're not on the front end of that curve, we're on the back end. So that's the side of entrepreneurship we need to be in. We need to also be in the side where we just build high quality businesses to recycle the dollars in our communities. So, and I don't know, people get upset with me because you always hear folks going, we need a buy black campaign, buy black campaign. I don't have a problem with buy black campaigns. But I remember the first time I got on stage after one of my favorite speakers ever, writers, Dr. Claude Anderson, author of Powernomics. We were on the same session. I was on a panel after he did a keynote. And I said, look, we need to stop focusing on buy black. We need to focus on build black. Because if you focus on build black, buy black becomes organic. Because if you build better black businesses that are capable, because most people don't realize this, but black businesses that sell to everybody, not just their community, have a significantly higher success rate and generate more wealth. So we need those local amenity-based businesses, but we also need to figure out how to sell to the marketplace. And so we need to figure out how to build black, because if we build black, our consumers, both in our community and not, will have more options. There'll be more diversity in our business environment, and we'll be able to recycle more wealth within the community. And then in turn, you will produce more employees from that community, which will begin to address the problems that we see in some of those other dimensions. And so good ecosystems, to produce equitable growth, we need to focus on the distribution of growth, which quite frankly is very difficult to do if you're an employee. Because then you're just relying on your discretionary income, and because black and brown people have been underemployed in the marketplace forever and get paid less, we have less of. Now you have a lower discretionary income, you have a lack of financial literacy, which makes it difficult for you to know what you're supposed to invest in. Because of that and the historical depression of the property values in the community you live in, it makes it harder for you to buy a house. And then when you get it, the appreciation is lowered because of the environment and the discrimination in that place. So now the distribution of wealth coming through the labor market is that much harder to do. But if you get into entrepreneurship, now you got it rolling. And it's not that everybody will be an entrepreneur. You're going to have entrepreneurs of different types. The problem is that we don't start them early enough. Going back to the story, we don't have an environment, systems, and ecosystems set up for that little girl to capture that energy, that skill set, and that talent. And she may ultimately have chosen, you know what, I don't want to be an entrepreneur. I really like going out and being a bookstore salesperson, or whatever she would want to do. But at least she would have the option, and she would know with full confidence that I have an option to do this if I so choose. Now our kids don't even know that. They luck into it. They fall into it. So what is an ecosystem? An ecosystem is basically what we call the business environment and the combination of networks, but it's not just the elements of it. It's not just the elements. I kind of distilled it into these 6. It's your entrepreneurial skills. So again, I did the research on black women startups. I probably talked to more black women businesses from just a conversation perspective than probably anybody but a dedicated researcher, right? I'm going around the nation talking to thousands of these women, some in the research and then some just informally as we go through it. And I was telling somebody, I was like, well, one of the things that I found in my research was, what do you think the number one thing black women said they wish they had before they started? Shout it out. What? Wasn't a mentor, but that was up there. What else? Money was second. What do you think was first? General business knowledge. And so one of the go-to sayings that I had is, they said that, I think it was the person from LinkedIn, said that entrepreneurship is like jumping out of the plane and building a parachute on the way down. And I said what has happened with black women is that they've jumped out of a plane and start building the parachute, but they only have like a toothpick and a napkin. But then the second thing is I said, well, if black women created 1 million businesses between 2002 and 2012, and we're only giving them 5 cents, what would happen if we gave them $1? So we talk about the skills that you need to run a business. In the labor market, we talk about skills all the time, right? In entrepreneurship, we're like, let's just give them some money and maybe a class on fast track to teach them how to write a business plan, and it's all good. So we need to develop the capacity in the ecosystem to train people from an early age to be entrepreneurs. It has to be natural. It has to be, the word I hate, normalized in our communities. Like our kids need to grow up just thinking, yeah, that's a natural thing I could do if I want to do. Right now, it's an exceptional thing. It's not a natural thing. Capital, of course, we talked about that. I'm not going to get into money. Relationships, the undervalued impact of social capital, the ability like you to be in this room and to network with people that you can do deals with, find out information, and that can have your back. Culture. We need to reinvigorate a culture of expectations in entrepreneurship, that we're supportive, that if people fail, we're going to pick them back up and not be like, see, man, I told you you shouldn't have started a business. What you know about business anyway? Looking at you trying to be all bougie, starting a fashion store on the corner. I knew you were going to fail. No, it's like, baby, well, I know you failed. Now get up. That's learning. Infrastructure. This is where that place matters, because you can have a demographic focus, a people focus, you can have a place focus, but most interventions are people in place. We pointed it on that map, the opportunity to both look at a place and then focus your energies on developing an ecosystem in that environment. But what's the infrastructure like? Because we know, we talked about it, black communities have been cut in half, black communities don't have their sidewalks done, black communities have potholes, black communities don't have adequate policing, either it's over-policing or under-policing, you keep going on. And the physical infrastructure, but also the digital infrastructure, both urban and rural. Like when I was in a meeting in Brookings with the mayor of Syracuse, and the mayor said that only 75% of the people in their city had access to quality internet. So you have this digital infrastructure, and finally policy. What are effective policies? Their policies can go both ways. And one of my favorite sayings was the former mayor of Kansas City, Kansas. I was at an event with him, and he said, man, when we get a big company that wants to come to our city, we roll out the red carpet. But when a small business wants to start, we roll out the red tape. And so what is the right policy? Some of this is distributive capital, like through CDBG funds, federal funds, where the city allocates it towards specific things. Some of it is, philanthropic policy. How are we going to invest our funds to create change? Some of it is actual policy, like we started talking about why do you need to go to esthetician school to just be able to braid hair, or complete hair school, like some of those policies that get in the way. Some of it is the educational policies where, I'll talk to teachers because I wrote a guide called The Case for Youth Entrepreneurship Education. I was talking to the teachers, be like, Dell, man, I'm on board, but man, it's so hard to get that kind of curriculum into our schools. And I'm like, something fundamental to the American economy and our public school system is saying we can't even get it in. There's something broken there. And to do the best in ecosystems, you have to make it easy. You have to make it easy for the entrepreneur. When you talk to most entrepreneurs, what they will say, and what we've heard the most, especially back when I was working with a whole lot of entrepreneurs, because I started as a business banker, ran an incubator, all of those things, is like, they would be like, well, Dell, yeah, I kind of went to this group over here, and they helped me here, but then they didn't tell me where else to go. So then I had to go and I had to figure this out over here, and then I had to figure this out over here. Well, that's a problem, because every time an entrepreneur spends trying to figure it out, what are they not doing? Working on their business. And so we talk a lot about, especially when I first started talking about this, moving from a foggy and fragmented ecosystem to where they're bounced around to a transparent and connected. And that starts with the relationships in this room, of people being willing to understand and know what each other are doing. So when somebody talks to them, they be like, I cannot help you, but if you go over here, they'll take care of you. Let me call them for you. Let me email them and tell you you're coming. Not just let me give you their phone number. The difference between a support system and a phone book. You want to be a support system and not a phone book. The dense ecosystem. So if we talk about making it transparent and connected, we also need to make sure that we have enough of the different types of resources. And I swear, I asked, I cannot remember her name, but we were chatting for about 10 minutes earlier this morning. She works with entrepreneurs, black entrepreneurs in Rochester. And I said this. I said, you work with black women entrepreneurs. So when a black woman entrepreneur comes up and says, I want to be an entrepreneur, where is she steered to? And she said, well, you know, she steered over to this microloan place over here and this small business place. And I said, that's the problem. We are literally socializing our entrepreneurs down low-income pathways. You can't tell me out of 1 million entrepreneurs that were started by, many businesses started by black women with an average sales of $20,000, $7,000 a year. Their next closest peer group, I think, is Latino women at $54,000 a year. That there weren't a whole lot of those entrepreneurs that had capacity to be high growth serial entrepreneurs, access venture capital. But what happens, somebody once said we evolve into the images we see, but I would like to say that we evolve into the pathways that are presented before us. Because you can't go where you don't know. And so somebody has this itch to be an entrepreneur, and they're said, oh yeah, go get this microloan. You get this $15,000 to get your little thing started. And that little thing is important, don't get me wrong. And I encourage I believe every black person, every black household in America should have a business, even if it's on eBay, to inject that into the culture. But those who want a $15,000 business should understand truly that that's what they want and need. And those that have the capacity to do more, to move into angel, venture, et cetera, should also have that pathway. We are artificially locking off pathways to opportunity for people. So if the talent is agnostic, right? Gallup said that the distribution of entrepreneurial talent is universal from their methodology, which means that there's a certain percentage of people from every racial group or gender across the globe that has the potential for high growth. And that would be great at just starting a business that is at whatever other level that it is. Because to me, I don't care whether it's one or the other. What I want for people is the option to choose and understand how to get there if they choose. Right now, we're not given that. And so that dense ecosystem, do we have the right providers in the right place? Are they connected? Are they culturally sensitive? Because when I went out and spoke about black women again a lot, I used to say there's a distinction between availability and accessibility. So we'll be like, we got a business plan class and then you look at the schedule, oh yeah, it's from 9 to noon, and it costs $1,000, and it's for 12 weeks. You know, and I'm being a little bit sarcastic, but we've seen that where it's not designed with the end user in mind. And I'm only sticking on black women because I think it's good to amplify a particular group and extrapolate it to the rest. But with black women, you have the scenario where the average black woman has a part-time job. She's raising her family as well, and she's starting her business on the side and running that. So if you're building a program in mind, there's a difference between making it accessible and making it available. And we have these one-size-fits-all things, and it's not really working for too many people. And so if we fix this, what you'll see happening is a more flourishing entrepreneurial environment where we go from 25%, for example, trying to figure out where to go to maybe 10%. That 15% of time can make the difference between success or failure. It can make a difference between $27,000 a year and $54,000 a year, and we can't underestimate it. And then as I'm rolling to my conclusion, this is something that came out in another of our popular guides. I wrote Rodney Sampson. We were down in Morehouse. I went down to visit him. We were just hanging out on the whiteboard, and he said, Dell, let me draw you how this works. So what he said is that there's actually a pyramid to this. It's early exposure and socialization, and then you move into the education, skill development, and talent placement, and then you get into entrepreneurship. The problem with most of our ecosystems, right, or most of our entrepreneurship support is we start when? When a person knocks on our door and says, hey, Dell, I want to be an entrepreneur. But you're already too late. You're going to support the few that come into those windows or have opportunity. But that whole environment, because most people don't realize this, the average person works 7 to 8 years in a job before they start their venture. The average successful age of a great tech startup is 40. Biotech is 50. So people are accruing skills through the labor market. But while they're accruing the skills through the labor market, they also have this system of understanding that I can be an entrepreneur if I want, which starts with early skill socialization, getting our kids exposed, showing them examples, showing them how to do it, lemonade stands or whatever like these little girls would do, building that into our educational curriculum, all of those different things. And so that as they're going through the labor market, they're accruing these skills, but they're also accruing parallel entrepreneurial skills. So at the time where they say, I want to go, they're ready. Right now, we don't have the parallel necessary to make it happen. And so he kind of drew this out, which people tend to use a lot. And so to simplify your action steps, because I believe the older I get, the less complex I become. Like, we just need to start getting it down to the bare minimum and just taking action. So the action steps: cups of coffee, your friend, create tables of intent. And I'm going to focus on the three. The next three real quick, and then I'm going to spend a little bit more time in the other two. So bias towards action. This came out of the tech field. You want to lean towards doing something versus doing nothing. Our people have had so many plans planned around them. I had 6 or 7 plans I just gave to the Black History Museum in Omaha, ranging back to 1990, about how they're going to fix the development problems in our black community. And probably the combination of those plans was $1 million. And not a one of them came across. Not a one of them got done. Not a one of them fixed anything. So we need to be biased towards action. Start something, start it together, and get some momentum. Just make sure that you're doing it with the end user in mind and that you've engaged them. Resist complexity. Sometimes within the planning process, and unfortunately sometimes our funders are demanding these complex strategies with evidence-based practices and all of these different kind of metrics and all of it. And then you're like, well, how am I going to create an evidence-based practice when black people are broke everywhere and nothing's worked? Where's the evidence? Black Wall Street? Do you want me to go back to the 1920s? So sometimes we need our philanthropists to engage horizontally at the table versus vertically. We need our political makers, policy makers to, what do I mean when I talk about horizontally? That means they're actually sitting at the table working with you versus saying, I got this pot of money, you do something that's compliant with my wills and I'll give it to you. Different conversation. Leverage technology. There's too much technology out there not to serve as the backbone for these kind of connected work. You know, especially with artificial intelligence, communication platforms, Zoom, et cetera. Now it's more than easy to have a technological base for it. So the last two things I want to talk about is cups of coffee. I don't know, you look kind of bourgeois in here. I bet, how many of you spent $8 on a coffee before? Raise your hand. I knew it. It's the only people my age will remember this. I feel like telling y'all, please pass the Grey Poupon. So all jokes aside, cups of coffee are cheap. And I use that as a metaphor. Like you picking up the phone and calling somebody and saying, hey man, let's go have a cup of coffee. I don't know you like that, but I want to. And not be transactional, just understanding what they're doing, understanding how they're trying to move, whether it's a community participant, whether it's, it could be a faith leader, somebody that's active in a community or a community member themselves that you meet. And this is important, especially cross-racial, because so many times white people approach us with transactional or white savior complex. And what it does is it makes us feel marginalized, and because of the history, it often reinforces negative perceptions of the group that's coming in and trying to help us out. But I guarantee you sit down with enough of coffee from people from the community, and all of a sudden you're their brother. They'll be like, oh man, that's my guy. Ken's my guy. Then next time somebody says, hey, I want to do some entrepreneurship, you got to call my guy Ken. Because there's relationship. And you do enough of those. When I did the 5-year grassroots strategy in Northeast Kansas City, Kansas, poor zip code in Kansas, I literally sat down with 40 different people. And I said, this is the program I want to do. What do you think are the challenges? You think it'll work? Because I wasn't going to go in there if they didn't invite me. And then everybody I asked, hey, give me 3 more people that you think I should talk to. I had a list of 80 more people that I couldn't get to. And that created a durable relationship for 5 years of at least, at minimum, 30 people coming every month I came up from Omaha to talk and work on strategies. That would not have happened had not I built that network of relationships just by sitting down and talking to them about who they were, what their aspirations were, what they were trying to achieve, how could I help them? It wasn't transactional. So we need to build that into our network. And then I coined this term after I was at the Black Developer Conference in Kansas City a couple weeks ago. And I was sitting and listening to all of these developers because black real estate development is an emergent trend across the United States. More groups do that, especially in the Midwest. And one of the consistent things that I heard was like, we're not getting together. And so when I mean a table of intent is pulling together people that after you've had your conversations, you get a sense of the field, or you see people that are moving with a certain same energy, is just saying, hey, let's just get together on a regular basis. We don't even have to have an agenda. I know we're all out here trying to support entrepreneurship in diverse communities and build equitable ecosystems, build durable relationships, and try to drive, opportunities for economic growth in these communities. Let's just get together and just talk. Because what you'll often find is just that, one, it builds that density of relationships that are needed to build a firm foundation for growth over the long run. But two, it's almost organic that opportunities will arise and things will come out from that table that says, hey, this is an opportunity for us to try. Who else do we need to bring around the table to figure out if we can get it done? Like, this is a completely different approach. This is why people have such a hard time of it. Because we're going back to old school community here. We're not talking about this top-down stuff. We're talking about building networks of relationships around a due north, which is equitable development, a better distribution of economic growth in our communities, so that we can have a long-run strengthened American economy and we can address some of the racial and power imbalances that have happened in the history of America. And so I want to just throw a couple of things, and Ken can send you out, so I'm not going to belabor, but these are some great guides that you can read and check out with some good information on them, and Ken will share that with you. And of course, I want you to consider becoming a member of IADC, hard sell. I think we're going to change the world. I told him, so maybe I'm just cocky, I don't know. But when I was going through the interview process, the last question they asked, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I said, I don't know, but I said, I know I'm going to change the world. But I think we're at a good position to where we can do so, because I was not going to tell another story, but I am, because I'm already running late. Most people don't realize this. How many heard of Greenwood, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street? O.W. Gurley comes up to Black Wall Street in 1906, and I'm talking real fast. 1906. He buys 40 acres. There was a gold rush called black gold called oil in Tulsa. Tulsa was an exploding economy. In his entrepreneurial foresight, he came up from Perry, Oklahoma, bought 40 acres and said, we're going to make this into a black community. They developed that black community. At the time, they had one of the best black hotelsmen period, build a major hotel in the community. They had multiple banks, multiple churches. They had people that would work in Tulsa and come back and recycle the dollars. In fact, there was a transportation individual that was so strong in Black Wall Street that he ended up selling his bus company to Tulsa, and he would privately fly oil barons into Tulsa. Anybody remember what happened in 1921? Racial massacre, they ended up destroying it. Now, you think it's going to take you a long time? O.W. Gurley came in 1906. It was destroyed when? 1921. Can anybody math that out for me? 15 years, and we're still talking about that as the symbol of black economic power in the United States since then. It won't take a lot of time, but say my quote again. Yep, that's all I got.